Hi, everyone. We are back with another Q&A session. If this is your first time joining us, I am with Jason Dover, FileCloud's Chief Product Officer, and I'm Katie Gerhardt. I am a Junior Product Marketing Manager. And today we are going to talk about an acronym that you might have run across before, DLP, which is, in this context, data leak prevention. So, Jason, let's break things down. What is a data leak?
Yeah, data leak is really can be defined as a security incident where you have sensitive content that winds up in a place that it shouldn't be. Typically, this is outside the boundaries of the firewall and the control of the organization that owns it. We've seen a lot of these in mainstream news recently. Even just last week, a popular cloud-based file sharing and sync solution had a data leak related to its e-signature module, where email addresses, password, and various other sensitive content of users wound up outside of the bounds of their controls. And this can be caused by vulnerabilities. It could be operational errors, accidents, user errors often. More often than not, though, it's really just directly related to some malicious attempt by a threat actor.
So, in the context of a data leak, what is data leak prevention? What does that mean to an organization that's working with sensitive data?
Yeah, given the popularity of data leaks that are happening and the increase in threat actor activity, DLP or data leak prevention really is critical to every organization, regardless of the line of business that they're in. And really, it's a cybersecurity strategy to help to prevent data leaks, right? That's really the main point of it. And so this goes across or it spans the various parts of your technology stack, the actual physical infrastructure, the network layer, the application layer, all the way up to operations and people, right? People are a big part of it. And so, really, DLP is about monitoring, detecting when you have sensitive content in the ecosystem, how it's being accessed, how it's being used, right? So, at an endpoint layer, how are people actually interacting with that content? Are there things happening that appear to be indicative of a potential attack? As an example, if you have files that exist in a share that's accessible, are you seeing all of a sudden a huge amount of that content being downloaded and perhaps in a way or to a location that it typically doesn't go to, right?
Mhm.
It also spans across what happens when content is traversing the network, right? And so this is where mechanisms such as encryption comes into play. It may be okay for people outside of the organization, or I should say outside of the bounds of the organizational limits to access that content. But as it's in transit, how do you make sure that a threat actor can't intercept that and read or find what's in that content? And then also at rest, right? So of course, organizations store a large amount of content about their employees, their customers, their business, their IP. There may be, depending on the industry, depending on the jurisdiction that they're in, requirements for retention as well, where you have to have long-term archival of some of that content. So making sure that when that content's at rest, it's also encrypted, and you also have monitoring in place and detection of things that look amiss would be another part of DLP. So really at the heart of this is getting an understanding of what the content is that you actually have in your ecosystem. Is where things like content classification comes into play, because not everything matters as much, right? If you get access to a time card, as an example, that's a little bit less of an issue than if information that contains people's social security numbers were to get leaked. So you need to understand what's actually inside the environment, have that classified appropriately, and then apply rules and logic to make sure that you're able to enforce protection of it. And we can think back historically, some of the first mechanisms around DLP were things like having rules that prevented people from plugging in USB drives, right? Where the computer just wouldn't detect it because you had a level of endpoint protection there. I used to work in email and infrastructure and directory services. And same thing with email. There was a layered approach where your actual mail client had some level of protection mechanisms on what you could do, what you could actually send. If you went up a layer, the email server itself had rules and policies. But then even above that, the SMTP gateway that the email server connected to also had rules that would prevent you from sending content that contained certain information or patterns or type of attachments. And so this layered approach is really important as it pertains to DLP.
So it really is a strategy that you have in place, preparative defensive strategy. You have the data leak prevention literally to prevent the data leaks in the hopes that they will be all effective and seamlessly come together.
Absolutely. It's definitely a strategy. You could think of it somewhat analogous to zero trust, right? And there are dedicated solutions and products that help you implement aspects of zero trust within your ecosystem. But really, zero trust is a strategy. It's an approach to how you think about your security posture and your environment. DLP would be somewhat similar. Now, of course, DLP is a bit more mature than zero trust, so there are a much broader range of dedicated solutions and products to help with implementing it. But you're right, it absolutely starts at being a strategy of we're going to make sure we have a clear understanding of what type of content we have in our ecosystem, and we're going to implement things in a layered approach across the entire environment to ensure that we're able to prevent things that shouldn't get outside the bounds of the organization from doing so.
Okay. So now I'm going to throw a curveball at you because there's another acronym, another DLP acronym. And I'm curious about how these two acronyms intersect and interplay and how they're related. So with the other DLP acronym that I'm talking about is data loss protection. Is there any meaningful difference between these two?
Well, we absolutely love our acronym soup in technology. So I'd say, yeah, data loss protection, it's very closely related, but it's a little bit different. Um, but there's some overlapping there, right? Data loss protection, though, would be a bit more focused on protecting content from destruction or loss,
Mhm.
as the name implies. Now, of course, leaks are a little bit different because you haven't necessarily destroyed or lost access to the content, other than in the case of, let's say, a ransomware attack. So they certainly do overlap, but there's a bit of a difference. Some of the same mechanisms would still play in, though, encryption as an example, so that you couldn't get directly at the content and destroy it. Classification would still play in because you need to understand what's in your environment. You may have different levels of how you protect that content. Let's say when it comes to backup and restoration of archive data that you still need access to, that classification may determine how long it would take you to get back access if there was a loss to your production ecosystem. And so your most critical content that's leveraged for running the day-to-day operations of the business, right? You may have an RTO related to that that's within a day, but let's say less important content, your recovery times may be a little bit longer. So some of the same mechanisms still certainly are connected, and there is a strong overlap. But data loss protection is more about preventing corruption, loss, and theft. Data leak prevention is much more about sensitive content winding out where it shouldn't be. And of course, with ransomware, there is a potential of losing access to that data as well. So both are important. You can't really look at them totally separately because some of the same mechanisms are going to be leveraged between both data loss protection and data leak prevention.
Lovely. That was really clarifying, and I appreciate the distinction between the two. And certainly, organizations need to be aware of the different manners of protecting data, securing data, even having data visibility, it all comes together. So I think we've talked generally about why DLP is important, data leak prevention, DLP. But can you give a few examples or specific information about the risks to an organization that doesn't have a DLP strategy in place?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. I think that data leaks, successful data leaks by threat actors, it flies in the face of the old adage that all press is good press. Because if you're an organization that's responsible for processing, handling, securing content, sensitive content of customers, and there's a successful data leak exploit, that's certainly not good press. It's not good for business. It's not good reputationally, and it can shake the confidence of your customer base. Not so long ago, there was a vendor in the file sharing and sync space that had a successful exploit of data that leaked out of their organization. And they went so far as to rebrand and rename the organization in order to totally separate themselves from that event. So it can have an impact to the business. Uh, some statistics from IBM actually notes that in 2023, the average cost of data leaks per organization in the US was $9.48 million. The global average was 4.45 million. Now, of course, this is skewed by the super large publicly traded organizations, but it still shows you just how much this can be disruptive for an organization. So there's an actual direct cost, and then there's an operational cost. Your PR teams, your technology organizations, your development teams all have to refocus from what they were doing that could help with growth of the business to now mitigate this. So as it said, an ounce of prevention is worth two of the cure, right? And so having a strong and solid DLP plan in place that helps to mitigate or lower the likelihood of this happening is much better than having to manage it after the fact. Now, of course, we know it's kind of a matter of when, not if, your organization is going to be targeted. Not every attack can be 100% prevented, but ensuring that there's a plan in place, for what's the steps you're going to do to lower the likelihood of it happening, and what would you do? How would you recover if it were to actually happen? The best organizations actually simulate these things, right? They have third parties that come in and attempt to behave like a threat actor that gets in the organization and attempts to try to extract sensitive content. And going through these drills certainly is a key to having a good strategy as well.
So there are a lot of elements then to data leak prevention, and we've established that it's incredibly important. It's only going to become more important as we move forward because we know that these malicious cyber criminals are becoming more sophisticated and they're leveraging all sorts of advanced tools to support their activities. So I imagine that our data leak prevention strategies will also continue to evolve. Now, that being said, is DLP easy to implement? How does an organization go about creating not just the strategy, but actually deploying the strategy in a meaningful way?
I'd say it's easy to start, like a lot of things, but it takes commitment, it takes focus, it takes budget to really get an end-to-end strategy in place. Because as we noted, this touches many, many layers of the ecosystem, right? From physical access, your authentication mechanisms that you have in place. So there's simple things you can do. Implement single sign-on and multi-factor authentication, right? That's a start because it makes it that much more difficult for threat actors to successfully get into the ecosystem. Okay, sure, I may gain access to your username and your password if that hasn't been properly managed and protected. But if there's a second factor, whether it's biometric or you need your cell phone or something else, that makes it that much more difficult to get access to sensitive content that no one else should have other than employees. Um, Beyond that, I'd say one of the most important parts is employee education and training. That's right at the heart of it, and one of the most powerful things that you can do. Because while you can have a number of different technologies at the network layer, at the application layer, email and communications and whatnot, there typically still is some way to get around things, right? I can take a screenshot, right, and still email that even if I can't actually send the file. So, training so that employees understand the right ways to go through actually sharing internal content externally, so that's managed, and then providing them the mechanisms to do that. That's important. Typically rogue IT, shadow IT, it happens because the IT organization hasn't provided appropriate solutions for their end users in the first place. But they have business to do. They have work to get done. And so they'll typically shortcut it. That's where these things happen. So if you take our solution, right, as an example, there's a number of ways, of course, that you can share content. We provide a managed way that the office of the CIO understands what's actually happening, can set rules, and you can still go through the same simple way you're used to with a lot of different cloud solutions. You can right click a file, share it, put an email address in, and that content becomes available as long as the policy that IT has implemented allows for it. So by providing solutions like that for customers, for your internal customers, your end users, that prevents them from going rogue because they don't have a way to do it. So back to the top of the question, is it easy to implement? It's easy to start, right? But there's a series of things at the application layer, at the network layer, the physical infrastructure layer, endpoint protection that you deploy on your end users' devices, having a strategy if you allow them to bring their own mobile device. Again, making sure that you have a robust employee education training plan on the risks and how to prevent data leaks themselves.
This is something I find so interesting because, of course, in order to have the most secure system in place, ideally, no one would ever have access to it. That is going to be your 100% security. But if nobody has access to it, that data can't be used, that data can't be leveraged. So there's this idea of risk management and how do you secure data without locking it up and throwing away the key. And it's fascinating to me the ways that we go to create these secure gates to content so that employees and stakeholders and vendors and all of the important people that need to, as you said, get their work done can leverage that data. Especially the more sensitive it gets, then the more interesting gates and thorns and barriers we have to put in place. But as you said, if people don't know how to use the tools, then they're not going to. They're going to go around. And I just think that's so interesting how the human psychology comes together with these technology tools and strategies, and they create this cohesive concept of what we call security, technology security. Do
Absolutely.
you,
There's always a balance between security and ease of use and usability. And typically the higher the security bar, the lower the ease of use goes. And so from a user experience perspective, it's about how do you find that balance. And as you said, about a risk management strategy, each organization has to intentionally come up with what their security posture is going to be. That's often where there's a problem. If you go to the IT team and they can't define what the actual security posture is, well, it's kind of the Wild West. So you decide, hey, yes, even sensitive content, there's legitimate reasons within our organization for that to be shared outside of the boundaries because of the business that we're in. But our security posture requires that that has director level approval. And so we're going to implement workflows that if an employee wants to do that, there's some approval process that needs to happen. There's some additional auditing and logging. That content sharing has to have an expiry associated with it. Things like that is how you get that balance so that people can do their jobs, but you're not exposing the organization to unnecessary and undue risks.
And I think this is one of the things that I do genuinely love about FileCloud. It's something that we talk a lot about in our marketing content about how FileCloud is a hyper secure infrastructure, but also very easy to use. So we enable collaboration while securing data. So could you talk a little bit more about how FileCloud achieves this? How do we strike this balance?
Yeah, I think you put it very well, enabling collaboration while securing content and data. And it's getting that balance because as you noted earlier, the best approach, right, to prevent any possible leaks is just lock everything up and prevent access. But that's not the real world. And our solution is meant to do that. Our purpose is to make it easy for people to collaborate, for them to share content, both internally and externally, but doing that in a secure way. And so there's things like auditing. We have granular security controls. We have things like defining expiries on how long content remains available. You can implement policies that prevent certain content from ever being shared externally, while other content may be able to be shared both internally as well as externally. You can integrate with your existing security model that you already have on your file systems and absorb that into the FileCloud system as well. You have very granular controls as you go down the folder hierarchy, where I can share something, maybe a broad directory, but perhaps there's subdirectories or sub-subdirectories that only certain people should have access to, or maybe the same people have access to it, but at a different level. We spoke through our chat a lot about classification, right? So actually understanding what content you actually have in your environment. Do you have sensitive content that you really need to put extra effort on to make sure that it doesn't get leaked? Well, we have mechanisms for classifying content and then leveraging that knowledge of what you actually have to now enforce those policies. We're able to look at locations so that you can control when and where content should be accessible. So maybe certain content, let's take GDPR as an example, should only be accessible to employees in the EU and not in the US. But again, maybe there is some special cases where that's allowable. Well, that's where our workflow automation capabilities come in, where you can have workflows that allow for business processes to happen, even that may be out of the typical norm. And we have third-party integration capabilities with other security tools as well, such as SIEM, CDR, AV, and a variety of solutions that helps you to round out this whole strategy, right? Integrating with the rest of the ecosystem is a key part for a DLP strategy in any environment. So those are some of the building blocks that we provide that helps you to make sure that you are able to collaborate. End users are able to easily share and access the content that they need, but you're able to mitigate the likelihood of content being leaked or getting into the wrong hands.
I think that's a really great description of FileCloud as part of the DLP strategy. And some of the things that you touched on, they connect to what we call in FileCloud DLP rules, which are so powerful and so easy to implement. The admins, they can just take this rule builder, the DLP rule builder, and create these rules, as you said, to restrict sharing based on IP address, or if somebody has an internal or external account. And I think it's really meaningful to have, again, to enable people within an organization to take steps to effectively automate and contribute to their data leak prevention strategy with specific tools and features. I have
Absolutely. You need a well-rounded toolkit for
mhm,
anything in security, right? There's no magic security product you deploy in your environment and that solves all the problems.
right.
It starts with having the strategy, defining what the security posture is, using that to then determine what tools you're going to bring in, how you're
Mhm.
going to standardize things so you don't have to manage a bunch of snowflakes all over the place. And once you bring that together, that helps you to now get to a place where you can lower the risk for the organization.
Okay. I have one last question for you. This is
Shoot.
unplanned. Do you have a favorite technology or tool within FileCloud that helps DLP as a strategy?
Yeah, it goes back to the thing that I've probably almost talked about the most as we went through this, and that's our content classification capabilities, right? Because that enables so many other things within the product set and within our customer ecosystems. And we recently just made a number of updates to that that makes it a lot easier for customers to interact with it. As you use the word rule builder, so we've updated the rule builder for our content classification rules. We've bought in some basic AI capabilities as well that can be leveraged so that you can use natural language to describe how you want to classify your content. And this is a big challenge for organizations. Oftentimes, they don't actually know what they have inside of their environment, but it
Mm.
starts with that knowledge for you to then figure out what your posture and strategy should be. So that really helps customers solve a pretty complex problem that if you were trying to do that manually would be very difficult and take a significant amount of time just by implementing our product, setting up the rules in the appropriate way that helps you to significantly reduce your time to determining what content you have and what you need to do next to ensure you protect it.
Awesome. Well, I think we are similar in that. I genuinely really enjoy the content classification tool. It's one of my favorites as well. So I think that this was a great discussion. I know I certainly have much more clarity when it comes to data leak prevention.
And don't
So,
forget data loss
and
protection.
data loss protection. So it was a whole lesson plan on all of the DLPs. So thank you so much for your time and, as ever, your expertise on these topics.
Thanks as always, Katie. Look forward to chatting again soon.
All right. Until next time, everyone, take care.
Yeah.